Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about human rights and government policy. Welcome back, everyone, to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I am your host, Michael Clogs. So, we have heard from Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, and, of course, leader of the Liberal Party, on climate change and other issues. And we've heard a lot of talk, but we haven't seen a lot of action. And if we focus on climate change in general, then we see that his program for carbon pricing and raising the price of polluting is kind of lofty looking and it really doesn't hold a lot of substance. In general, the critics of these programs have said that it may actually eventually hurt consumers. It may hurt the multitude of people in of course in the middle and working class families, making it harder for them either to buy gas, exchange a gas-driven car for maybe an electric car or a hybrid that would use less gas. The program, his carbon pricing program, only truly benefits the corporations that would receive the money. And in that case, there are no real incentives for innovations in powering our communities. We hear a lot of talk about from the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party about energy. Well, energy to them only means one thing, and that thing is oil and gas. It has nothing at all to do with any other ways of powering our communities. We're going to hear from a Conservative MP that she's talking about how Canada's oil is cleaner than any other oil in the world. It produces less emissions than any other oil in the world.
It's 16
the whole point, I hate to disappoint her, is to slow down those emissions and make them not net zero, but absolute zero. That is the goal. We have heard from the province of Alberta, of course, they're an oil producing province, that this would actually hurt their community in extreme measures. So it's left to Justin Trudeau again to come up with a plan that would help the workers of Alberta transform their technology from oil and gas to powering Canada in a way that doesn't use carbon. And there are a lot of different options out there, but as we can see that there are no incentives to actually work with those ideas. The Liberal government isn't promoting anything that would put that incentive in place in order to eliminate the idea of burning carbon. So when we burn carbon, it doesn't matter how we burn the carbon leaches into the atmosphere, causing greenhouse gases, thus raising the temperature of the planet. Now, I've been in a number of conversations about climate change and climate action, and while I'm not going to say that the arguments that, hey, this is a natural cycle of our planet and there isn't really much we can do about it. Well, there are some validities to that argument. Yes, there are natural cycles and breaths to our planet. Our planet actually breathes. It's not just a simple piece of rock that doesn't exchange gases and things like that. It does. It is a rock that is simply put alive. And that actually has been shown by different studies and everything done by NASA. We won't really get into that too much right this second. We're talking about politics. So, yes, this isn't a natural cycle, but we do have an effect. We are part of the planet, and therefore we do have an effect on what is actually happening to our environment. We need to, simply put, need to end the destruction of our environment and learn to work with nature in ways that we can hang on to our technology and do some of the great things in leaps and bounds that physics has brought to us. Yeah, we can do both. We don't have to throw our hands in the air and say, hey, we give up to nature and just let it take over. No, but we have to learn to work with nature and to work with those cycles that come with it. So that brings us to, of course, to our the latest thing from the Liberal government, the throne speech. We're going to listen to the throne speech, and there are some valid points. There's some points that need to be better refined, and there's some ideas that need to be redeveloped so that they are more earth-friendly. We do need to, as is mentioned in the throne speech, we need to learn to work closer with our brothers and sisters of indigenous ancestry. We need to learn some of the ways of working with nature that they know they have been on the land longer than we as immigrants have been here. Yes, we're all immigrants to Canada if we are not indigenous. So we need to learn to work with what is going on in nature in Canada, learn to protect the forest. We need to learn to work with the waterways, and we need to stop tearing apart the things that we actually need to live as thriving beings on this planet. So that on a global level, again, we need to learn to work with those people who have been there all this time and stop just simply raping the resources and trying to develop our society in a way that just isn't sustainable. So let's listen to the throne speech first, and then we'll listen to Jagmeet Singh and Michelle Rempel Garner from the Conservative Party. So let's move forward with the show. Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Have a good afternoon.
Honorable Senators
Maligaluktit,
of the House of Commons.
Kavamaw Kikatuktingin. Congratulations to each of you, and welcome to the new parliamentarians who will together with their colleagues, make their mark on Canada.
I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is not a symbolic declaration. It is our true history. In each of your own writings, I encourage you to seek out the truth and to learn about the lived realities in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. Although each community is distinct, we all share a desire to chart a way forward together towards reconciliation. La découverte de tombes anonymes
The discovery of unmarked graves of children who died in the residential school system shows how the actions of governments and institutions of the past have devastated Indigenous peoples and continue to impact them today. We cannot hide from these discoveries. They open deep wounds. Despite the profound pain, there is hope.
J'ai déjà constaté engagement de la population
Already,
canadienne
I have seen
envers la réconciliation.
how Canadians are committed to
Les
reconciliation.
peuples autochtones se réapproprient
Indigenous peoples
leur histoire,
are reclaiming
leur
our
récit,
history,
leur culture
stories,
et leur langue
culture,
de manière
and language
concrète.
through action.
Les non-autochtones comprennent
Non-Indigenous
désormais
peoples are coming to
accept
understand
la
and accept
véritable compact
the
du
true
passé
impact of the
et la
past
souffrance subie
and the
par
pain suffered
des générations
by generations
d'Autochtones.
of Indigenous peoples.
Ensemble, ils
Together,
avancent sur la voie de la
they are walking the
réconciliation.
path towards reconciliation.
We must turn the guilt we carry into action. Action on reconciliation. Action on our collective health and well-being. Action on climate change. Aulat hatau hatarea hagata tamanna pitsia hatigi ni pinasuaktau tillugu.
We must turn the guilt we carry into action. Action on reconciliation, action on our collective health and well-being, action on climate change.
En faveur de la réconciliation. Action en faveur
We must turn the guilt we carry into action. Action on
de
reconciliation.
notre bien-être collectif.
Action on our collective health and well-being.
Le changement climatique.
Action on climate change.
Notre planète est en danger.
Our Earth is in danger
Des effets du réchauffement
from a warming Arctic
et des ravages
to the increasing devastation of natural disasters.
Notre terre
Our
et
land
nos
and our
populations
people
ont besoin d'aide.
need help.
Nous devons passer de la parole
We must
aux actes
move talk into
et nous
action
adapter là
and
où
adapt
c'est nécessaire.
where we must.
Les temps pressent.
We cannot afford to wait.
Du chagrin et de la douleur
From the grief
causés par
and
les
pain
enseignants
of
autochtones
residential schools
à la peur des menaces
to the fear of threats to our natural environment, to the profound impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. This year has been hard on all of us.
I want to thank all the workers across Canada, especially those in healthcare, for their efforts to keep us safe and healthy, and offer my deepest condolences to those who have experienced loss and loved ones during the pandemic. It has touched us all, including those in this chamber, who lost a cherished colleague just a few days ago, Senator Forrest Nising. J'offre à sa famille
To her family and to all of you, my deepest sympathies. The pandemic has shown us that we need to put a focus on mental health in the same way as physical well-being, because they are inseparable. As you begin this 44th Parliament of Canada, and as we recover from the effects of the pandemic and build a better relationship between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples, I urge you to transform discussion into concrete results for us and for our country.
Collaborate with and listen to each other.
Listen to the diverse voices who speak a multitude of languages and who shape this country. Écoutez les nombreuses voix.
Listen to the diverse voices who speak a multitude of languages and who shape this country. Confronting the hard questions will not always be easy or comfortable, and it will require conviction, but it is necessary. The outcome will be a sustainable, united Canada for you, for me, for our children, and for every generation to come.
As we speak, British Columbians are facing immeasurable challenges as their homes, their communities, and their well-being are impacted by terrible flooding. But in a time of crisis, we know how Canadians respond. We step up and we are there for each other. And the government will continue to be there for the people of British Columbia. In 2020, the Canadians did not know they would face the crisis of a once-in-a-century pandemic. But as always, no one should be surprised by how Canadians responded. We adapted, we helped one another, and we stayed true to our values. Values like compassion, courage, and determination. Values like democracy. And in this difficult time, Canadians made a democratic choice. Their direction is clear. Not only do they want parliamentarians to work together to put this pandemic behind us, they also want bold, concrete solutions to meet other challenges that we face. Growing an economy that works for everyone, fighting climate change, moving forward on a path of reconciliation, making sure our communities are safe healthy, and inclusive. Yes, the decade got off to an incredibly difficult start, but this is the time to rebuild. This is the moment for parliamentarians to work together to get big things done and shape a better future for our kids. C'est le moment.
This is the moment to build a healthier today and tomorrow. Priority number one remains getting the pandemic under control. The best way to do that is vaccination.
Already, the government has mandated vaccinations for federal and federally regulated workers and for everyone traveling within Canada by plane, train, or ship. It has also ensured a standardized Canadian proof of vaccination for domestic and international use. The government is securing next-generation COVID-19 vaccines, boosters, and doses for kids from 5 to 11. And around the world, Canada will continue working with its partners to ensure fair and equitable access to vaccines and other resources. To build a healthy future, we must also strengthen our healthcare system and public health supports for all Canadians, especially seniors, veterans, persons with disabilities, vulnerable members of our communities, and those who have faced discrimination by the very system that is meant to heal. There is work to be done on accessibility, on care in rural communities, on delayed procedures, on mental health and addictions treatment, on long-term care, on improving data collection across health systems to inform future decisions and get the best possible results. The government will work collaboratively with provinces, territories, and other partners to deliver real results on what Canadians need. This is the moment to grow a more resilient economy. The best thing we can do for the economy remains ending the pandemic for good. But as we do, we should rebuild an economy that works for everyone. At the height of the lockdowns, the government made historic, necessary investments so families could keep paying the rent and small businesses could stay afloat. Now, with one of the most successful vaccination campaigns in the world and employment back to pre-pandemic levels, the government is moving to more targeted support while prudently managing spending. To ensure no one is left behind, support will be extended or added for industries that continue to struggle. At the same time, the government will also continue making life more affordable for all Canadians. Inflation is a challenge that countries around the world are facing. And while Canada's economic performance is better than many of our partners, we must keep tackling the rising cost of living. To do that, the government's plan includes two major priorities: housing and childcare. Whether it is building more units per year, increasing affordable housing, or ending chronic homelessness, the government is committed to working with its partners to get real results. For example, the Housing Accelerator Fund will help municipalities build more and better faster. The government will also help families buy their first home sooner with a more flexible first-time home buyers incentive, a new rent-to-own program, and by reducing the closing costs for first-time buyers.
Supporting families will make life more affordable for the middle class and people working hard to join it.
The Canada Child Benefit has already helped lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty and will continue increasing to keep up with the cost of living. The government will also continue building the first ever Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. By the end of 2022, average fees for regulated childcare will be cut in half in most of the provinces and territories. And in some places, this will even happen as early as the start of the year. Families will save thousands of dollars. 4 jurisdictions have not yet reached agreements on childcare. 2 are territories with unique infrastructure challenges, and the government will keep working together to ensure we meet the needs of the North. The government will continue working with the remaining 2 provinces to finalize agreements that will deliver $10 a day childcare for families who so badly need it. Investing in affordable childcare, just like housing, is not just good for families. It helps grow the entire economy, and so does immigration. That is why the government will continue increasing immigration levels and reducing wait times, while supporting family reunification and delivering a world-leading refugee resettlement program. This is the moment for bolder climate action. Building a resilient economy means investing in people, but the work does not stop here. After all, growing the economy and protecting the environment go hand in hand. By focusing on innovation and good green jobs and by working with like-minded countries, we will build a more resilient, sustainable and competitive economy. As a country, we want to be leaders in producing the world's cleanest steel, aluminum, building products, cars and planes. Not only do we have the raw materials and energy to do that, most importantly, we have skilled, hardworking Canadians to power these industries. As we move forward on the economy of the future, no worker or region will be left behind. The government will bring together provinces, territories, and municipalities and Indigenous communities, as well as labor and the private sector, to tap into global capital and attract investors. Canada will emerge from this generational challenge stronger and more prosperous. Le gouvernement
The government is taking real action to fight climate change. Now, we must go further, faster.
That means moving to cap and cut oil and gas sector emissions, while accelerating our path to a 100% net zero electricity future. Investing in public transit and mandating the sale of zero emissions vehicles will help us breathe cleaner air. Increasing the price on pollution while putting more money back in Canadians' pockets will deliver a cleaner environment and a stronger economy. Protecting our land and oceans will address biodiversity loss. In this work, the government will continue to strengthen its partnerships with First Nations, Inuit and Métis to protect nature and respect their traditional knowledge. Creating the Canada Water Agency will safeguard that vital source and support our farmers. And to address the realities communities across the country already face, the government will also strengthen action to prevent and prepare for floods, wildfires, droughts, coastline erosion, and other extreme weather worsened by climate change. The government will be there to build back in communities devastated by these events. This will include the development of Canada's first ever national adaptation strategy. While
we address climate change, while we fight COVID-19 and its consequences, while we grow our economy for everyone, we cannot turn away from other challenges.
This is the moment to fight harder for safer communities. While we address climate change, while we fight COVID-19 and its consequences, while we grow our economy for everyone, we cannot turn away from other challenges. Gun violence is on the rise in many of our biggest cities. While investing in prevention and supporting the work of law enforcement, we must also continue to strengthen gun control. The government has taken important actions like introducing lifetime background checks. The government will now put forward measures like a mandatory buyback of banned assault-style weapons and move forward with any province or territory that wants to ban handguns. During the pandemic, we have also seen an unacceptable rise in violence against women and girls. The government is committed to moving forward with a 10-year national action plan on gender-based violence and will continue to support organizations providing critical services. When someone in our country is targeted because of their gender, or who they love, or where they come from, the way they pray, the language they speak, or the color of their skin, we are all diminished. Everyone should be and feel safe. The government will continue combating hate and racism, including with a renewed anti-racism strategy. This is the moment to stand up for diversity and inclusion. Canadians understand that equity, justice, and diversity are the means and the ends to living together. Fighting systemic racism, sexism, discrimination, misconduct, and abuse, and including in our core institutions, will remain a key priority. The government will also continue to reform the criminal justice system and policing. This is the moment to rebuild for everyone. The government will continue to invest in the empowerment of Black and racialized Canadians and Indigenous peoples. It will also continue to fight harmful content online, stand up for LGBTQ2 communities while completing the ban on conversion therapy. Les deux langues officielles.
As Canadians, our two official languages are part of who we are. It is essential to support official language minority communities.
and to protect and promote French outside and inside Quebec. The government will reintroduce the proposed Act for the Substantive Equality of French and English and the strengthening of the Official Languages Act.
To support Canadian culture and creative industries, the government will also reintroduce legislation to reform the Broadcasting Act and ensure web giants pay for their fair share for the creation and promotion of Canadian content. This is the moment to move faster on the path of reconciliation. This year, Canadians were horrified by the discovery of unmarked graves at former residential schools. We know that reconciliation cannot come without truth. As the government continues to respond to the calls to action, it will invest in that truth, including with the creation of a national monument to honor survivors and with the appointment of a special interlocutor to further advance justice on residential schools. To support communities, the government will also invest significantly in a distinction-based mental health and wellness strategy guided by Indigenous peoples, survivors, and their families. Everyone in our country deserves to be safe. That is why the government will accelerate work with Indigenous partners to address the national tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLBTQIA+ people. The government will also make sure communities have the support they need to keep their families together while ensuring fair and equitable compensation for those harmed by the First Nations Child and Family Services Program. Reconciliation requires a whole-of-government approach, breaking down barriers and rethinking how to accelerate our work. Whether it is eliminating all remaining long-term drinking water advisories or implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the government is committed to closing the gaps that far too many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities still face today.
This is the moment to fight for a secure, just, and equitable world.
The last 19 months have underscored that we live in a deeply interconnected world. Canada must stand up on the pressing challenges of our time through our own commitments and by increasing our engagement with international partners, coalitions, and organizations. In the face of rising authoritarianism and great power competition, Canada must reinforce international peace and security, the rule of law, democracy, and respect for human rights. Canada's prosperity and middle-class jobs depend on preserving and expanding open, rules-based trade and ensuring our supply chains are strong and resilient. At home, the government will continue to protect Canadians from threats to our communities, our society, and our democracy. A changing world requires adapting and expanding diplomatic engagement. Canada will continue working with key allies and partners while making deliberate efforts to deepen partnerships in the Indo-Pacific and across the Arctic. Increasing Canada's foreign assistance budget each year and investing in sustainable, equitable, and feminist development that benefits the world's most vulnerable and promotes gender equality will continue to be priorities. We will always stand up for a brighter future for all. La décennie est encore jeune.
This decade is still young, with compassion, courage, and determination. We have the power to make it better than how it started. But that can only happen by standing together.
Parliamentarians, never before has so much depended on your ability to deliver results for Canada. That is what people expect and need from you. In relation to ending this pandemic, their priorities for this 44th Parliament are clear: a more resilient economy and a cleaner and healthier future for all of our kids. I do not doubt that you will honor the trust that has been placed in you. Members of the House of Commons, you will be asked to appropriate the funds to carry out the services and expenditures authorized by Parliament. Members of the Senate and members of the House of Commons, may you be equal to the profound trust bestowed on you by Canadians, and may divine providence guide you in all your duties. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech and nakokmik.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Good morning. Canada must take strong action to address climate change and protect our environment. We must also simultaneously address a crisis of rising costs, a crisis of national unity, and a crisis of waning hope of economic inclusion for many Canadians, particularly young people. Canada has the capacity to do all of these things. However, the Trudeau Liberal government has made many promises on these issues, but has failed to deliver. This month, the Liberals had a disappointing performance at the COP26 Climate Summit, and this week delivered a throne speech that had precious little vision as to how Canada will both fight climate change and ensure that Canadians can make ends meet. With the resumption of Parliament, Canada's Conservatives will be holding the government to account on these issues and giving Canadians a real plan. We'll work with a sense of urgency that climate action deserves. Years of lip service to enacting policies that will materially reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the federal Liberals must end. We will also work from an understanding that moving towards a low-carbon economy won't just magically happen without extensive planning, collaboration across levels of government, political stripe, workers, industry groups, and average Canadians who right now are struggling to make ends meet. The reality is that Justin Trudeau has failed to address that there are precious little alternatives in many parts of the country to using high-carbon Saudi oil to get around, get the goods to people who need them, or ensure we stay warm. In economic terms, we understand that in our country, there aren't enough affordable alternatives to carbon fuel. That is, higher prices of carbon doesn't necessarily mean that a Canadian will choose a different low-carbon product as a substitute because those alternatives don't readily exist. This means that Canada's greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise while Canadians struggle to make ends meet with rising prices and loss of jobs. And that is the Liberals' true record on climate. Canada's Conservatives understand and know that there's a better way. We know that our natural resources must play a role in securing a sustainable future for our country and addressing these challenges. That's why we will present Canadians with policies that incent the development of low-carbon consumer alternatives to high-carbon products and activities and ensure that they are affordable. This will help Canadians lower their carbon footprints as opposed to simply costing them more to keep them the same. A good example of this is public transit. The Liberals have promised a lot of projects, but have failed to get them built. Even in major urban centres, many Canadians have to resort to driving simply because good public transit options don't exist. And now with fuel shortages and our reliance on high-carbon Saudi oil, Canadians are having trouble making ends meet due to high prices. Yet another example is the electricity we need to power things like electric vehicles. If the electricity we use to power an electric car is generated by high-carbon coal plants as opposed to low-emitting sources like nuclear, we have a problem. And yet, Justin Trudeau's Environment Minister won't even say that nuclear energy is an obvious alternative to coal. And this brings us to oil and gas. Right now, at this very moment, many Canadians are fueling their cars with high-carbon oil from places like Saudi Arabia, who have some of the worst carbon emission policies in the world. The Liberals have not put any emissions cap on the importation of that high-emitting fuel, which is shameful. Worse, the Liberals have offshored Canadian jobs and our own energy security to these regions. They've done this by failing to recognize that carbon energy in Canada is already being decarbonized or helping to accelerate that process. This is being done through incredible technologies like carbon sequestration and storage. While we move towards a low-carbon global economy, Canada's own low-carbon energy can and should be used to offset our reliance on high-carbon Saudi oil. Anyone who doesn't recognize that this is part of the problem, not part of the fight against climate change, has an issue. This week's failure on behalf of the Liberals to condemn the comments made by David Suzuki, which said that critical energy infrastructure might be blown up, is just one example of this. Canada cannot allow this to continue. There's too much at stake. The Liberals have talked a lot in recent weeks about carbon emissions in Canada, but they've failed on many fronts. They've failed to acknowledge that a 100 megaton emissions cap already exists for Canada's energy sector, which is working hard to decarbonize its production. In the words of both Alberta NDP opposition leader Rachel Notley and United Conservative Premier Jason Kenney, Alberta must be at the table when emissions caps are discussed, and I agree. Ms. Notley has also recently pointed out that this sector isn't the only part of Canada's economy that emits carbon dioxide. She said, if the federal government is going to be talking about emissions caps for the oil and gas industry, they need to be talking about emissions caps for all sectors. And again, I agree. That's why today, Canada's Conservatives are calling on the federal Liberal government to do the following. Actually build public transit infrastructure and create incentives which would develop viable, affordable alternatives to high carbon emitting consumer goods and practices, like Saudi oil. Acknowledge that Canada's fight to protect our environment and address climate change must unite our country, not come at the expense of one region of the country over another. If we're going to regulate one sector, it must be done across the board. Develop a plan to fight climate change that ensures that there's hope for affordable living for Canada's youth and addresses reconciliation. This includes Indigenous persons and the workers of natural resource industries, many of which are in Western Canada. This plan should respect provincial jurisdiction and give provinces the right and responsibility to develop their resources with clear targets to create energy security in Canada. This would include a plan to supply Canadians with domestically produced low-carbon energy and reduce imports of high emissions from fossil fuels produced overseas. Present a clear plan for Canadian workers who are unemployed due to this government's failure to address climate change while offshoring our jobs. This plan should set clear timelines and funding to facilitate skill retention and job growth in areas like Western Canada who have been significantly impacted. Obtain a clear guarantee from President Biden that his administration will support the continuation of the Line 5 pipeline. And align our carbon capture incentives with the U.S. to ensure our innovators aren't left behind. Stop talking about it. Give our workers and communities the tools to compete. This is what Canada's Conservatives will be pressing for. We will be fighting for affordability for all Canadians, for climate action, and for jobs. We won't be dividing or pitting region versus region. We'll be uniting this country and holding this government to account. Thank you.
With the Canadian press. Do you think Canadians outside of Saskatchewan, Alberta, Newfoundland actually care about the job losses you speak of, care about the impacts felt in those provinces' oil and gas industries and energy industries more broadly?
Well, it's a little cold outside today, and I think a lot of Canadians care about the increased price of fuel, both to get around and also to heat their homes. I think they care deeply about the increased price of virtually everything, much of which are transported, and those price increases are passed along in increased prices of fuel. I think that it's also deeply unfair to say that people in other parts of the country aren't impacted by job losses in the energy sector. Steel workers in other parts of the country, many Atlantic Canadians work in there. And I think, just the fact that that question even exists tells me that there's a lot of misperceptions about how important Canada being able to produce a secure source of decarbonized energy, how pervasive that is and how harmful it is. I've watched as an Alberta MP this debate become so polarized, and I think for the political gain of the Liberals. The people in my province really do care about climate action. They want to be part of the solution. That's what we're calling for today, and I think that that's something that all Canadians do care about. I don't understand why we can't have it all, why we can't have energy security, why we can't use Canada's energy as part of a transition to a low-carbon economy, why we can't secure jobs instead of offshoring them. So I think that is something that can unite Canadians. What I hope to achieve in this Parliament, particularly given the fact that we've seen a lot of increased rhetoric on the other side from the Liberals, is that type of caring approach that will see real climate action, but will also protect our jobs and make life affordable for Canadians.
Before the last election, Conservatives came out with their own carbon price and their own emissions reduction goal. Are Conservatives sticking with carbon pricing as a policy that it endorses? Are you going to be reviewing the climate plan that was introduced, I believe, in April and ran on during the election?
So, as I said in my remarks, I think we have to start from an understanding that, yes, we have to take urgent climate action. I feel that urgency. We also have to understand that, as I said in my remarks, that is not going to magically happen overnight without us developing affordable, readily available alternatives to high carbon consumer products and practices. So I do think that there is a role for government to create incentives for the development of those alternatives. And that comes in very many different types of baskets. And that's where our party has been heading with its policies. The platform that we put forward in the last election and where we want to go in this Parliament really does take that approach. It says, look, we agree with the international community. We agree with people who are raising the alarm bells on climate. We also know that, without those plans, for example, I'll use an example in my community, the Green Line. It's this massive transit project that had funding allocated to it 8 years ago that could have taken tens of thousands of cars off the road in my riding. It's nowhere to be seen, right? So you have to make sure that people have affordable alternatives to carbon in order for that behavior to change. In economist terms, carbon is still relatively price inelastic in Canada, and that's what we have to change. What I don't want to see happen is what we saw last week, where the Prime Minister went to a climate summit, announced a policy with no details, created a lot of concern both with consumers across the country, provincial governments, industry, and it really sort of has this destabilizing effect. If we have smart, sensible economic policies, we can do both. And I think that over the last 6 years of the Trudeau Liberal government, there really has been a lost opportunity to work with even people like me. My background is I worked at the University of Calgary, commercializing clean technology, carbon sequestration. This has to be a united front. And I'm really tired of the Liberals, sort of dunking on my province as opposed to taking climate action that makes life more affordable, creates jobs, and doesn't offshore them. So I think that we're going to present a really strong, smart opposition to the Liberals on this, and it will benefit all Canadians, and all Canadians will care.
And I'll check if there is any questions on the phone. Opératrice, avons-nous des questions au téléphone?
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. Faites étoile 1 pour toute question. We have a question from Yasmin Hassan from CBC News. Please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Good morning. Thanks for taking our questions. I was just wondering about the medical exemptions. Would all of the medical exemptions currently provided to members of your caucus comply with the Ontario Ministry of Health and NACI guidelines on who should be eligible for these exemptions from vaccine requirements?
I'd like to take this opportunity to remind every Canadian that vaccines are safe and effective. I am fully vaccinated. I encourage every Canadian who has not yet gotten a vaccine for COVID-19 to do so. All of our members of Parliament are compliant with House of Commons rules on COVID restrictions, and we rely on the advice of medical experts, not the Liberal Party of Canada.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Talked a lot about real action, but was in fact just real empty. And there's a reason for that. And the reason why I'm concerned is because there's an urgency around some of the crises that Canadians are facing right now. They need help urgently. And it's clear that the Liberal government is not responding to that urgency. They are choosing not to respond to that urgency. We know that the housing crisis is a crisis. That is a concern that I hear everywhere I go from anyone that I speak to. People cannot find a home that's in their budget. Parents who have housing are worried about their kids. People who have good jobs are worried. People who are struggling and don't have good employment are worried. And people who have no income are unable to find housing that's available for them. So this is a serious crisis, and we're not seeing the urgency to respond to this to the level that we need. And that's a problem. And we're not seeing specifically, and something that's really missing, is a plan for Indigenous housing, something we know is a specific concern. So that's a troubling sign that they're not responding, that the Liberals and Justin Trudeau are not responding to the urgency that people are faced with. The climate crisis, we are faced with the impacts of it right now. We are now seeing another potential atmospheric river that's going to hit BC, and we already are reeling from the impact of the last heavy rainfall and flooding that has been disastrous. Given the extreme weather, given the climate crisis, we expected that same level of urgency to be reflected in the throne speech, and it's not. And one of the most important things that COP26 spoke about, and it was agreed upon, is that we need to end fossil fuel subsidies. And that is completely absent from the throne speech. And while the Liberals have talked about it, they've talked about it in the past as well. They've talked about it and never done it. In fact, they've increased those subsidies. So it's another thing that I'm particularly concerned about, the urgency to respond to the climate crisis, ending those fossil fuel subsidies, and using that public funding to incentivize renewable energy, to support workers, to have a clear plan for workers, a real just transition. These are things that we need to focus on. And we need to make sure that communities are resilient so they have the supports they need so they can respond to the extreme weather by investing in infrastructure that helps them prevent some of the disasters that we've seen by being more prepared for extreme weather, whether it's forest fires or flooding. And those are some of the things that we want to see this government focus on. Immediate things, paid sick leave is something we agree with. But we've got to point out that we talked about this 22 times over the past 18 months. And we've said to the Liberals, this is something that could have saved lives. There is no reason to delay now, but it is still very disappointing that it took them this long to get to this point. We knew that this is something important, and they're only just now promising it. But this will be a victory that we fought for and obtained for Canadians if it gets passed, with something we want to see happen immediately. Donc aujourd'hui, je veux encore répéter comment ce qu'on a vu hier avec le discours du trône, c'était effectivement vide pour répondre aux besoins des gens, avec l'urgence qu'on a besoin. On parle de la crise climatique et le fait que la Colombie-Britannique a été frappée fort par la crise climatique et le fait que les actions nécessaires ne sont pas dans le discours du trône. L'urgence pour répondre à cette crise n'est pas là. On veut voir un engagement pour éliminer les subventions aux entreprises pétrolières. Ce n'est pas là. Et on a besoin des actions concrètes pour aider les municipalités d'être plus préparées pour la température extrême. On sait aussi que la crise du logement frappe fort. C'est tellement difficile de trouver un logement abordable. On doit avoir des actions aussi urgentes pour faire face à cette crise. Et dans le discours de Trump, cette urgence n'était pas là. Et finalement, on a plein de choses, plusieurs choses sur lesquelles on peut travailler tout de suite. Un, par exemple, c'est une congé de maladie payée. C'est quelque chose qu'on a demandé depuis longtemps, depuis 18 mois. On a demandé directement au gouvernement, au Justin Trudeau, 22 fois d'avoir un tel programme, d'augmenter l'accès à ce programme. Il a dit non 22 fois. Maintenant, il accepte que c'est important. On veut que ce projet de loi passe vite, rapidement. Donc, on est toujours là pour travailler ensemble, mais je veux encore réajouter que notre but, c'est de s'assurer que ce gouvernement fonctionne pour les gens. Et ça, c'est notre but. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. With that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Mr. Singh, you said yesterday you were uncertain about whether your party would support the throne speech when it came up to a vote in the House of Commons, confidence vote, as you know, and if the government lost that vote, we'd be into an election campaign. Having met with your caucus now, do you have any clarity now on that position? Do you know with more certainty whether you will or will not support the throne speech in the House?
The throne speech, we said really clearly, does not respond to the urgency that Canadians are faced with. And one of the things that we were looking for to see, is this a throne speech that shows us that there's a willingness to work together? After speaking with caucus, caucus agrees very clearly that this is not a throne speech that indicates a willingness to work together with us. This is a throne speech that does not respond to the urgency that Canadians are faced with. There may or may not be a vote on this, and we will let you know as soon as it comes clear when that vote is, the way we'll vote. But I wanted to be clear to the Liberals that they should not take our support for granted, and that this speech, as it's been presented, does not present to us a desire to work together in the interests of Canadians.
You noted yesterday that there was no mention in the throne speech of pharmacare. There's barely a mention of it from Mr. Trudeau's side during the election campaign. Do you believe this is no longer something the government is going to act on? And if so, does that change your willingness to support the government, not necessarily on the throne speech, but in other future votes?
Well, for any vote, the Liberals should not again count on our support. We will look at each vote and make a decision based on if it's going to benefit Canadians or not. The Liberals have already shown a willingness to go to the Conservatives or to the Bloc if they want to pass something that hurts Canadians. And they know that we are going to be there. If it's a support that will help people out, that will make things better, we're always available for that. So I think that should be clear for any vote. The Liberals shouldn't expect us to support their bills, any of them. It will only be the case that we support if there's a benefit to Canadians. And in terms of pharmacare, it's something that I mentioned and given it as an example on the campaign trail, and I give it as an example again of the Liberals saying one thing and then doing something completely opposite. And this is a really stark example because it wasn't that long ago, 2 years ago in 2019, they campaigned on it. They campaigned on bringing in pharmacare. And then in their throne speech after the election, they included that in specifically that we will work towards pharmacare. And the complete absence of pharmacare now, the fact that the Prime Minister is unwilling to even say the words, make it clear that this is just another example of the Liberals saying one thing and doing another. And that has been the problem. And that's why we have always said we're worried about their actions. They sometimes say the right things and then often don't do them. In this case, with the throne speech, they haven't even said the right things, let alone do the right things. So it certainly is a problem. And it is another example of why we are uncertain if the Liberals want to work in the benefit of Canadians, because that's something that we put out very clearly as a priority for us. And now they've not even mentioned the word. They themselves mentioned it as a priority for them. And the fact that they've abandoned it should also give Canadians pause about whether they are serious about doing the things that they say they want to do.
Catherine Lévesque, La Presse canadienne. Bonjour, Monsieur Singh.
Bonjour.
Donc, juste sur le discours du trône, si je comprends bien que vous n'avez pas encore pris de décision là, en caucus sur si vous allez l'appuyer ou non, c'est ça?
À ce moment, on n'a pas dit aux gens si on va voter oui ou non, mais on veut encore répéter deux choses. Un, les libéraux ne peuvent pas prendre pour acquis notre appui pour aucun vote. Ce n'est pas quelque chose qu'ils peuvent prendre pour acquis, on va décider à chaque vote comment on va voter. Comme pour chaque projet de loi ou chaque vote, on va faire cette décision quand on a une décision devant nous. Et deuxièmement, ce que le discours de Trône a montré à nous, c'est que le gouvernement libéral ne veut pas travailler avec nous parce qu'ils ont complètement manqué d'ajouter des éléments importants pour les gens, comme des actions concrètes pour faire face à la crise du logement pour la communauté autochtone, ou des actions concrètes pour faire face à la crise climatique, incluant une annulation, un arrêt des subventions pétrolières.
OK, donc, juste pour clarifier là-dessus, est-ce que vous avez pris votre décision, mais vous ne voulez pas l'annoncer ou la décision n'a pas été prise? Juste un oui ou non.
On va vous donner la décision quand la date arrive.
OK. Ma deuxième question, c'était justement sur, en fait, les exemptions de vaccination des conservateurs. Bon, je sais qu'on en parle beaucoup, mais je voulais quand même savoir quelle était la position du NPD là-dessus. Est-ce que vous pensez que les conservateurs devraient dire combien il y a d'exemptions médicales? Est-ce que vous pensez qu'ils devraient faire preuve de plus de transparence là-dessus ou vous n'en avez pas?
Oui, on pense que le Parti conservateur doit montrer plus de transparence, bien sûr, mais au-delà de ça, on pense que le Parti conservateur doit réfléchir pour un moment, c'est quoi leur but, c'est quoi leur raison d'être, parce qu'ils sont à ce moment l'opposition officielle du Canada. Et depuis des semaines, quand les gens ont fait face des défis dans leur vie, quand on est dans une pandémie, avec plein des enjeux, la seule chose qui soulève du Parti conservateur, c'est le fait qu'il veut avoir une exemption, il veut avoir des permissions spéciales, et il pense qu'ils sont des élus et les règles n'appliquent pas à eux. C'est une mauvaise message envoyé aux gens, et c'est un exemple que ce parti n'a pas des priorités qui sont liées aux priorités des gens. Ils ont montré une faille de leadership et ils doivent réfléchir sur ce qu'est le point d'avoir un parti comme ça dans une crise comme ça s'ils ne peuvent pas avoir un accord sur quelque chose assez simple comme le fait de protéger les gens qui travaillent dans le même milieu de travail. Oh, it's a bit long-winded, so I got to think about that. Yeah, I'll try to. Yes, of course, I believe that the Conservatives should be more transparent about what's going on in their caucus and about their vaccination status. They need more transparency for sure. But really, what I would want to send my message to the Conservative Party is they are the official opposition of Canada. In a time of crisis, in a time of struggle, when people are still facing a pandemic, when we're really uncertain about the future, the cost of living is going up, things are hard right now. And the fact that the only thing that we hear coming out of the Conservative Party for the past number of weeks is the fact that they want special treatment, they want exemptions, they don't agree about getting vaccinated, is really a failure of leadership. They're completely missing the priorities of Canadians. They are completely out to lunch when it comes to what Canadians are going through. Canadians don't want to hear the official party of Canada talking about getting special permission for their members of parliament. Canadians want to see solutions to the housing crisis. They want to see solutions to the climate crisis. BC is underwater. They want to see real fixes to the problems that people are faced with. And the official opposition of Canada right now is focused on getting special permission for their MPs. That is completely disconnected from the realities that Canadians are faced with.
Bonjour, Juliane Lapointe de Radio-Canada.
Bonjour.
Monsieur Singh, peut-être nous dire, cette semaine, est-ce que vous vous êtes vous-même personnellement senti à l'aise dans la Chambre des communes? Qu'est-ce que ça prendrait à plus court terme là, pour qu'il y ait un sentiment de sécurité partagé?
En général, je sais que la plupart des gens reconnaissent l'importance d'être vacciné. Donc, ça me donne de confiance. Personnellement, je suis plus inquiété pour les gens qui travaillent dans le Parlement, les gens qui travaillent sur la colline. Et je veux qu'on fasse le travail nécessaire pour créer un milieu sécuritaire pour tout le monde et qu'on suive les conseils des santé publique. Et ça, c'est mon but. Et à ce moment, pour la plupart des gens ici, je pense qu'il y a un consensus. Les gens sont d'accord qu'on doit prendre les mesures nécessaires et ça me donne de confiance.
Maintenant, vous nous convoquez ici pour dire que vous êtes déçu du discours du trône, que vous trouvez que c'est un discours qui est vide, mais vous n'êtes pas prêt à mettre le mot pour dire que vous êtes contre, que vous allez voter contre le discours. Pourquoi vous gardez cette porte ouverte-là en ce moment? Est-ce que vous êtes en train de tendre une main aux libéraux, justement?
Je veux montrer, et c'est important, c'est une question importante parce que je veux montrer ce que j'ai toujours dit, ma volonté de travailler ensemble et ma désir de faire fonctionner ce gouvernement. Et ce qu'on a vu depuis longtemps, c'est vraiment un grand problème du Parti libéral et du gouvernement libéral. C'est le fait que, comme on dit, les patines ne suivent pas les babines. Le fait que les bottines ne suivent pas les babines. Le fait qu'il dit souvent les belles mots, mais il ne les suit pas. Et les actions ne sont pas là. C'est vraiment quelque chose que j'ai entendu des gens souvent quand je voyage à travers les pays. Et c'est dommage parce que ça a un impact. Quand le gouvernement libéral a promis de faire quelque chose et ne le fait pas, ça blesse les gens. Ça nuit les efforts d'améliorer la société. Donc, c'est un problème. Ça, c'est pourquoi je soulève ce problème. Et dans ce discours de trône, ce n'est pas seulement un problème des belles paroles, mais sans des actions concrètes. Ils ont aussi manqué d'avoir des paroles nécessaires pour montrer une vision pour régler les problèmes dans le pays à ce moment. Donc, mais je veux toujours montrer que mon but, c'est de faire fonctionner ce gouvernement, de forcer ce gouvernement de livrer les marchandises pour les gens. Et je suis toujours ouvert à trouver des solutions, à trouver des façons de forcer ce gouvernement de faire ce qu'il faut. Donc ça, c'est pourquoi je veux toujours garder les portes ouvertes pour trouver des solutions.
Alex Ballingal, Toronto Star. I just saw this morning on the notice paper, your party had put up a bunch of private members' bills and motions that you want to propose. And one of them was to call for the cancellation of construction of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I know you were asked about that. We asked you a bunch of times during the election, and you'd said you wanted to wait and see if you guys won the election. You'd look at the situation and make a decision once you had all the details in power. So I'm wondering, has the position changed of your party? Are you now willing to say you have enough information, you call for the cancellation, or has your position changed, and what exactly is it?
Well, our position has never changed in the sense that we've always been opposed to the project. We think that it was a wrong decision. The government shouldn't have purchased it, and it was a wrong decision to move ahead with it. And we'll look at any assets in terms of the government and what makes the best sense in terms of how we move forward. But our position has never changed. We think it's a wrong decision to purchase it, wrong decision to move forward with it. And we'll continue to talk about how we can create a good plan for workers and how we can continue to present real options for a just transition that includes a clear vision for where workers will have good jobs and a good future. That's really our priority, and that's where we want to see funds spent.
I just want to make sure I understand. Are you saying that the motion put forward by Peter Julian to call for the cancellation of the pipeline, that's not the party policy, or that is now the party policy to cancel construction of the expansion?
My position hasn't changed on this. I've always been opposed to the project, and I've said once in government we would assess and make the decision about what to do with the asset.
Okay.
Bonjour, M. Singh, Boris Proulx du Devoir. Est-ce que vous allez appuyer la motion 1 concernant le Parlement hybride, ce qui a été proposé là?
Oui, on est pour cette motion, on est pour un Parlement hybride. On pense que ça donne un outil nécessaire pour la sécurité, la santé et aussi la flexibilité pour les députés.
Et je voudrais revenir sur le projet de loi attendu par le gouvernement concernant les aides financières pour la pandémie. On attend ça très bientôt. Qu'est-ce qui ferait en sorte que vous... j'ai compris que vous appuyez pas nécessairement le projet libéral qui va être présenté. J'aimerais savoir qu'est-ce que vous voudriez voir là-dedans pour l'appuyer. Et si jamais le Bloc était tenté de l'appuyer, là, est-ce que ça vous ferait pas perdre un petit peu votre levier d'action sur le gouvernement?
J'ai manqué le début de votre question. C'est quoi le projet de loi? Quel projet de loi de vous parler?
On s'attend à ce qu'il y ait un projet de loi sur tout ce qui est aide financière pour la pandémie.
Pour la pandémie, OK.
Ouais.
Oui. Donc, ce qu'on a noté comme problème avec ce qui est proposé par le gouvernement libéral, c'est un projet de loi qui va couper l'aide aux gens. Et sans avoir une alternative, c'est un projet de loi qui, on est contre ce projet de loi parce que ça va couper l'aide aux gens sans avoir une amélioration de l'assurance emploi, parce qu'à ce moment, l'assurance emploi, comme vous savez, ne couvre pas 60% des gens. Donc, ça veut dire que la majorité des gens qui travaillent au Canada ne sont pas couverts par l'assurance emploi. Donc, c'est un projet de loi qui va blesser les gens, qui va laisser de côté les gens qui ne peuvent pas retourner au travail. Donc, c'est un projet de loi on va voter contre. Et si le gouvernement est prêt de donner une alternative, de s'assurer qu'il règle les autres problèmes comme des réductions d'aide pour les gens qui reçoivent l'aide financière, nos aînés et les gens qui reçoivent le bénéfice canadien pour les enfants. Donc, s'il règle ces problèmes qui existent à ce moment, on est ouvert de trouver des autres solutions. Mais à ce moment, sans avoir une alternative, on est contre ce projet de loi parce que ça va faire mal aux gens, ça va blesser les gens. Et les autres partis, si le gouvernement libéral veut trouver un allié avec les Blocs ou les conservateurs pour couper l'aide aux gens, c'est à eux de décider et c'est à eux d'expliquer pourquoi ils vont couper l'aide aux gens quand ils ont besoin d'aide.
Okay, long and short of it is throwing money at a problem isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. We need to actually take concrete action. If there's a money element involved, we need to spend that money wisely so that we can push the concrete actions as far as we can. Just saying that we have set aside money to solve a problem isn't going to fix the problem without action. The money sits there. The money is powerless. In order to ensure that money is not a drain on our society, we have to ensure that our society is actually taking the appropriate actions to move forward. So that is the message that we should be sending to Justin Trudeau. We should be sending a message to Justin Trudeau, hey, we want to curb and bring to an end all carbon exports. That includes oil, gas, and the coal trains that actually run across the Canadian border back into the United States. And let's move forward with real climate action and not just focus on, hey, we need this much money to make something happen. We need to move forward with action, not just money. So, thank you for listening today. You've been listening to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. My name is Michael Clogs, and have a great and green day. Thank you for listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions NDP.media for more information.